What's up, horror fans? 2023 is going to be dead and in a grave. And I am with my good friend over there, Dr. Zayas God. Buckle down, guys. Take off your pants, get naked, get some drinks. We're going to discuss our favorite horror movies of 2023. Danny, do you have it in you to get through this today, man? This is a lot.
I've been looking forward to this. I thought last year, 2022, was a phenomenal year for horror.
Yeah.
My I don't think this year was as good as 2022
Mm-hmm.
in terms of quality, but I think that there was a quantity of very good to, great horror films. I don't know if there is as many like great to epic horror movies as there were last year or in previous years.
Let's do honorable mentions. And then since you are the prime horror fan, let's set it up so that I'm going to start the first movie, number 10, but then you could have the last say on number one. You know what I'm saying?
I think we have
Sounds
the
good.
same number one. I'm willing to bet. So we'll
It doesn't
definitely.
matter. It doesn't
Yeah, it
matter.
doesn't
Okay.
matter.
All right. Well, then let's talk about some honorable mentions for your list because I actually don't have any honorable mentions for mine.
So I have a few honorable mentions, and then I have a few. I put down just like some funny awards that I think are. I think for specific things and performances that I think need to be shouted out.
Okay.
So first of all, I call this the John Malkovich Award for Best Accent
Oh,
uh,
Jesus. Okay.
from Rounders. If
Okay.
you, I want this man has to get me my money. You know, and
Right.
the John Malkovich Best Accent Award for this year goes to Russell Crowe in The Pope's Exorcist. Uh,
Oh, nice.
Fantastic. Our friend Chris, of course, does that accent fantastic in his own little review of The Pope's Exorcist. The Pope's Exorcist was actually a an honorable mention for me. Maybe the most surprisingly fun horror movie I saw this year, and easily the best Exorcist movie that I saw this year.
Oh, boy.
Spoiler alert.
Ouch.
The most insulting franchise bait goes to Ellen Bernstein for returning for Exorcist Believer.
Okay.
She's in the movie for about 5 minutes, and it's somehow worse than what they do to Sally Hardesty in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in 2022. Not making my honorable mentions, but singular performance that might deserve an Oscar nomination. Dave Bautista in Knock at the Cabin.
Huh.
I thought his performance was better than the rest of that movie. I didn't hate the movie, but he was fucking great in it. And I think he easily is running away with the best wrestler turned actor of all time.
Oh, hands down. Yes, absolutely. I agree with that.
And uh, two more stupid ones.
Bring it on.
The best part 10 in franchise history, I think, easily goes to Saw 10, which blows away Jason X and Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 as the two most prominent number 10s. I mean, I'm sure there's an Amityville movie and a Puppet Master movie I'm missing, but and the best Adams Family of 2023. Last year it was the actual, the fictional Adams Family because of Wednesday. This year it is the Adams Family who worked on the film Where the Devil Roams. They're also the family that did Hellbender. Where the Devil Roams is fantastic. I watched it last night, and if it wasn't for recency bias, it might have made my top 10. But I didn't want to include a movie that I watched last night on my year-long top 10 because of how, but it's fucked up and it's great, and I love their movies. So, yeah. Okay.
Awesome. Okay. Those are some awesome awards, man.
My actual honorable mentions are,
Yeah.
and these are just in no particular order. I'm just going to
Okay.
shout them out. Two foreign films, The Conference, which was a
Wow.
really good semi-original slasher movie, and The Elderly, which creeped the hell out of me and has an ending that I would love to talk about, mostly with you because you're a big sci-fi person, and it's like
Yes.
this like crazy horror movie that just becomes sci-fi in its like literal last scene, and I'm like, what? Uh, the Blackening,
Yeah.
super fun. Love the concept. Loved just the way that they handled the tropes and everything else. Really dug that one. Barely missed my top 10. Maybe the most surprising movie, Totally Killer on Amazon Prime. I got to see that in a theater. Really good. Back to the Future, but with a serial killer vibe. Uh, really liked the way that they had like a 2023 woke teenager go
Right.
back to like the mid 80s and critique because it didn't feel forced. It felt real, being that it was like a modern teenager going back.
Right.
Plus, it had some good kills and good performances. Um, and then probably the movie that would, if there was a number 11 on my list, it would be The Passenger.
Oh.
Carter Smith's The Passenger. Two excellent performances. Kyle Gallner, absolutely terrifying in the lead role. This is a movie that I would classify as realistic horror because there's nothing supernatural about it. It's just about your average, rural guy who turns out to be a serial killer, psychopath, and just excellent movie.
Why don't we just jump into it? I'll give my number 10 first off. All right. So for me, my number top 10 is Saw 10, Saw X, right? I really liked this movie. I'm a big fan of the Saw franchise. You and I covered essentially every movie in the franchise, like, when the last one came out. But, uh, you have to admit that not every movie is of the best quality, right? I actually love Saw because of the lore, and this movie just kind of dives in deeper. It's like, okay, well, now it's basically Jigsaw Begins, right? And it's funny because it's essentially a prequel to Saw 2, and it's a sequel to Saw 1. Uh,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
so
Yeah.
he's like established.
It's Saw 1.5.
Right, right, right. So it's funny because he goes to Mexico, and you have this essentially this like Mexican cast, and then Jigsaw, and then you also have his little pupil from the first few movies.
Amanda.
Um Amanda, right, exactly. Shawnee Smith, right? And you can kind of predict everything that's gonna happen from a mile away. Like you never think, oh well, Jigsaw is gonna die, because first of all, he doesn't die in this one. But it, even though you know what's going to happen, there's going to be a bunch of twists and turns, it still was like thoroughly enjoyable. I'm not a huge gore hound. Like I don't seek out horror movies because of gore, but there's something about Saw where I'm okay with it and I actually kind of enjoy it. So the kills in this are pretty nasty for this franchise. Uh
Yeah, especially the first one. The woman who has to cut her leg off with,
yeah.
and then yeah, that is easily my favorite, or just the most nasty kill in the movie.
Well,
Uh,
the first kill in the movie isn't even like an actual kill. It's just like a daydream that Jigsaw has, where the guy gets his eyeballs sucked out of his head, which is in so much of the promotional material for this movie. I think it's so funny that it's like he just sees a guy taking a watch out of a drawer and he's thinking about sucking his eyeballs out of his head.
yeah, the punishments don't always fit the crimes with Jigsaw.
Yes.
Uh, but I, like I said, I think this is easily the best number 10 in a franchise.
Yeah.
I think that they made a great decision to just, kiss, keep it simple, stupid. Just go back to Jigsaw, to Amanda, to one singular trap. They didn't involve the police, and there was no investigations, so we didn't have to bounce back and forth between all these extraneous characters. My number 10 is a movie that is on Shudder. It's called Influencer.
Okay. Okay.
And this movie was directed by Curtis David Harder, and it has a absolutely gorgeous setting in Thailand. And it's, as the title would suggest, you have this influencer who is there to, she's basically there without her boyfriend because they broke up, but she's there to like, you know, take pictures alone and get followers. And she meets this woman, and this woman, they become friends. And it's basically an elaborate plan by this woman to take over her life. And I think this is a perfect movie for this generation of horror.
Yep.
It's basically a takedown on social media culture, a takedown of influencer culture, obviously, and Cassandra Naud, phenomenal performance in the lead. She had a very good year. She was also in It's a Wonderful Knife, which is a movie I had a lot of fun with. Did not make my list,
Yeah.
but she is excellent in this movie. And this movie was going about a 7 out of 10 until the ending, and it has maybe one of my favorite horror movie endings of the year. And that boosted it enough that I felt like I wanted to include this in my top 10.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
And it's on Shudder.
Yes. Influencer is my number 7. I actually really like Influencer a lot.
Awesome.
It kind of falls into this category of movies that I watched that I wished I had watched with Sherry, right? Because I'll watch a lot of horror movies just because after reviewing for this channel, we have to make them for this specific video. And then I'm like, okay, well, is it going to be really gory? Is it going to be goofy? Is Sherry going to have a problem watching it? And then I'll watch it and I'll be like, fuck, I should have watched that with Sherry because she would have loved this. She really loved that movie last year. What was it called? The Stranger. What was the movie where the woman is in another country and
Watcher.
Watcher. Thank you so much. Watcher. She really loved Watcher. That was one of her favorite movies overall for the year. And this kind of reminded me of Watcher, like a little bit, at least in the feeling of it. It
takes place in another country.
Yeah.
The main protagonist is like a blonde who doesn't really know what's going on.
That's a good point.
There are a lot of similarities. I thought this was the perfect movie for this generation, if that makes sense. Yes. I think you obviously liked it. You put it in your top 10. So I think you know what I mean. Yeah. I feel like this is a kind of movie that people should watch more because it has a lot to say without being heavy-handed about its message, which is always a positive for me. But yeah, big fan of this film, the filmmaker, and I thought Cassandra Naud's performance is one of my favorites of the year.
Let's move on then to my number 9. I wonder if this one's going to be on your list. I bet you it is, though. My number 9 is Suitable Flesh. Is Suitable Flesh on your list?
Yeah, it's my number 8.
Okay, pretty close.
I grew up watching Stuart Gordon adaptations of Lovecraft. I grew up with Reanimator, From Beyond, Castle Freak, and to see what is basically the best Stuart Gordon H.P. Lovecraft adaptation done by like the people that love Stuart Gordon. Joe Lynch directed this. Barbara Crampton, who somehow celebrated her 65th birthday, even though she looks like 5 years have passed since From Beyond. I don't understand. She probably like sleeps in like a chamber at night. Judah Lewis in this movie is a revelation. My God, like he just bursts onto the scene in this movie. Heather Graham, like talk about somebody who I hadn't seen Heather Graham in anything in years. And then she just is in this movie and she like the balls that everyone has in this movie to do the things that they do. Like it's weird to say, like, and I'm not trying to be like perverted and weird, but it's like weird to see sex in a movie a lot in nowadays.
Yeah.
Like Poor Things is in theaters right now. And there's like stories of people walking out of the movie theater in Poor Things because there's too much sex in it. And I'm like, what happened? Like, what happened to us as a society?
Yeah.
And
go ahead.
and this movie is it's basically, like I said, long live Stuart Gordon. It is a Reanimator style, From Beyond style, erotic body horror film where there's body swapping and there's nasty deaths and there's fluids everywhere.
To me, it feels like they were intentionally making a movie that you would see on Cinemax at like 12:30 at night or HBO. And it's so funny that we have to kind of like preface this with like, not that there's anything wrong with that. Like, we have to kind of like with kid gloves talk about something like this where it's like, oh, it's a movie with sex and there's attractive women in it and we like looking at attractive women. It's kind of weird that we have to like defend it, but that's the way that movies were up until like 10 years ago, and there were so many more, like in the 90s, there were so many movies like this in the 90s and even spilling over into the early 2000s. And it just feels like that's what they're going for with this. It's like an erotic thriller via Lovecraft.
Yeah.
This has a really great moment that involves a car backing up. I'm not going to spoil that in case people haven't seen it. That was one of my favorite shots in the movie.
And I mean, Barbara Crampton and Heather Graham. So yeah, you're kind of hitting me where I live now. So
right.
So that's my number 8.
Okay,
that's my number 8. My number 9.
Tell me.
Is my favorite anthology of the year, and it's Satanic Hispanics.
Oh, this one. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
My Lord. So I am a big fan. First of all, this is not the last time you're going to hear me say this name. Demian Rugna. He is one of the 5 filmmakers who worked on this. His segment in this, which is called Tambien Lo Vi, is, I think, my favorite in terms of it's the scariest. It's the first of the chapters. The overarching story, The Traveler, is a really good wraparound story with a kick-ass ending, which includes this character that looks like who's the Star Wars character who's in The Mandalorian? He shows up in the desert and shoots Timothy Oliphant.
Oh, Cad Bane.
Yes, he looks like Cad Bane meets the villain, like the cowboy from hell in Preacher.
Oh, like, okay, wow.
Yeah, and that's like the wraparound story.
Yeah.
And then you have Demian Rugna's story, which is freaking has one of the best jump scares of the year. Gigi Saul Guerrero has another really good story in here with some really just nasty, I think it's called Nahuales. It's also really one of the scarier ones. And then there are 2 segments that are ridiculous. And I thought at first, as I was watching it, that I was like, this is a weird tonal shift to go from like really scary and like great jump scare to like all out comedy horror. Eduardo Sanchez, who's one of the filmmakers who did the original Blair Witch Project, he does one called El Vampiro, which is really kind of silly. And I was like, tonal shift, really weird. But then we got to the other comedy one, which is directed by Alejandro I'm going to say this name wrong, Bruguez.
Okay.
And it's called The Hammer of Zanzibar.
Okay.
And it's just the greatest thing I've ever seen.
Oh no.
And when I saw it, I laughed so hard and I loved it. It reminded me of all the great things of like Evil Dead 2 and just like so ridiculous. And between the really good jump scares in the horror ones and the laugh out loud humor in the comedy ones, this ended up being, with the wraparound story, this ended up being my favorite anthology of the year. And I like to shout out the anthologies because I love the anthology horror movies. I feel like we're in a renaissance of them with the VHS movies popping out like one a year.
Right.
The VHS 85 I thought was really good. I just didn't like it as much as which one was last year? 99, 94. They're making so many. I'm struggling. I don't remember which is which.
Right. I don't remember off the top of my head either.
But I grew up with renting the Amicus Tales from the Crypt and Vault of Horror.
Yes.
And then obviously born in the 80s to watch Creepshow and Creepshow 2 over and over again on repeat, grow up with the Tales from the Crypt series on HBO and Fox. I love anthology stuff, so if you give me a good anthology, I'm just the target audience for it, and Satanic Hispanics is easily my favorite one of the year.
And I think we're up to my number 8. Here's
Yes.
the thing. I am pretty sure this one is on your list. I'm thinking this one is going to be higher on your list than mine, though. Ready? So here we
Okay.
go. Brooklyn 45.
Okay.
All right. What number is that for you?
My number 6.
Okay. Hey, we're not too far apart when we're on the
I know
list.
this is with 3-4 years of doing this together. We're on the same page.
Yes. Except when it comes for Terrifier.
One of my favorite, I don't even know if you call this a subgenre of horror, but I love movies that are enclosed. I always bring it back to phone booth, because what's more enclosed than a phone booth?
Right.
I love movies that are enclosed thrillers, and this is an enclosed thriller ghost story. And it's historical. It takes place in 1945 at the end of World War II. It involves soldiers and people who were in the war. It really gets into some dark stuff that went on in the war. I love the complexities to these characters, and I love movies that aren't afraid to let the characters talk if the talking is actually interesting. And for me, this movie was so interesting. Ted Gagan, the director, took a lot of the inspiration from his father, who was a veteran, and they filmed this in a Brooklyn apartment. There's a lot of long takes and one takes and just so many little things, but it just comes back to, you take 5 characters played by 5 really good actors and you put them in a room together and you don't let them out, and that's it for basically 90 minutes or 85 minutes.
Right.
And you got Jeremy Holm in there, who was awesome in The Ranger. He was also really good in another movie I just saw the other day called Herd. You have Larry Fessenden in a part that I know that Ted Gagan wrote for him, and he is fantastic. There is some out of nowhere gore. There's some really good ghost effects that aren't even effects. This movie was fantastic. It's my number 6.
They do explain things. They explain things that happen in the war. They explain things that happen in their personal lives, but it never for a second feels like, I'm the filmmaker, I have to make sure you know this, so the character's going to say it. It doesn't feel like that. It's friends that have a history with each other together in a room, and there's a supernatural situation, but then there's this also really great real world twist that kind of involves paranoia that we have post World War II. And I think it's this great mixture of both together. There's really great practical effects, like you said. And a movie like this, I think you kind of already said this, but they live and die based on the performance of the actors. And I think that everyone in this movie is great.
My number 7, and I think this might be a little high, a little towards the top. I think you might have this a little bit lower down, closer to number 1. My number 7 is Talk to Me.
Okay.
That either means that it's not on your list or it's your number 1.
It's not my number 1. It is my number 2.
All right. I mean, look, and really, this movie placed at number 7 more because I just happen to like the movies ahead of it. Um, I only saw this one time in the theater, and I feel like with multiple viewings, especially, I've read interviews, and I've listened to interviews with Daniel and Michael Filippo, the directors, from Australia, and they said that like they're very interested in making. They're making a sequel called Talk to Me.
Oh, okay. Yikes.
All right. Hey, look, if they can make Happy Death Day to you,
Yeah.
okay. But I feel like when that comes out, I'm gonna rewatch this, and I'm gonna think to myself, I should have put this maybe a little higher. Uh, this movie had at least 2 or 3 scenes that deeply disturbed me when I saw
Yes.
it in the theater.
Yes.
And it also had one of my favorite performances of the year by Sophie Wilde, the lead girl in this film,
Yes.
who I thought was fantastic. In fact, talking about it makes me feel like I should have made it higher on the list.
No, it's all good. I'm very curious as to what is higher than it on your list.
Well, one of the movies you already know, but we'll get to it. But yeah,
Okay. Okay.
Talk to Me, I thought is in one of the most unique takes on the possession genre that I've seen in a
Yes.
very long time.
Yeah.
The idea that like possession becomes a game that
Mm-hmm.
like kids play at drunken house parties,
Right.
and that you could be possessed for 90 seconds at a time, and you're like willingly letting spirits into you, and
Right.
like I don't know, like I'm the weirdo who like I will go into the haunted house and I will walk around the haunted house.
Right.
But I don't know if I'm grabbing that hand and saying, talk to me.
Right.
I
Right.
don't think I'm doing that.
My number 6 is going to be Infinity Pool. Now, for Infinity Pool, I've been passing the ball to you to describe the movies, but I'm going to take this one. I was a big fan of Possessor the year that it came out. It was on my top 10 on this channel. I think it was pretty high in my top 10 as well. Possessor, I felt was more disturbing than this was, but this was pretty damn disturbing. What I noticed this year in my top 10 is I have a lot of movies that are science fiction horror movies. Now, when you watch Infinity Pool for like the first, I don't know, 20 to 30 minutes, it doesn't necessarily feel like a science fiction movie. And then there's a pretty hard science fiction twist right away. Um, when I saw the media and like when I heard you talking about it, I thought it was going to be this movie where like Alexander Skarsgård meets Mia Goth, and she's kind of twisted. She brings him into her world and does depraved things, and there would be kind of weird, trippy moments. It is that, but there's so much more to it, and especially because I think you even said this in your review that you did, your short, where it feels like a sequel to Possessor, at least like in terms of theme and like the type of movie that it is. It feels like it's in the same world as Possessor. And
Yeah, well,
so
definitely.
yeah. So if this is what Brandon Cronenberg is, just based on these two films, it's like science fiction concepts and like really holding to them, but making like really disturbing stuff that make you question your reality. Sign me up. Oh, my number 5 was a movie. Okay, this is actually perfect segue. I'll make this nice and short. But Birth Rebirth. So I just said in the last thing that there's been a lot of horror sci-fi in my list. This movie is just like Poor Things, and maybe a little bit like Infinity Pool, a Frankenstein type thing. It's basically, people using science to create life. That's in all of these movies that we've just discussed. I'm not going to spoil this for you, Danny, because I do want you to go watch Birth Rebirth. This movie's fucking great. Marin Ireland is from The Boys. She's that one that's like in charge of like their PR. Do you know who I'm talking about? The woman that like rips her own hair out.
Yes.
She's really good in this as this sort of emotionless, scientific doctor, basically, that is essentially, it's like a modern day Frankenstein, but it's with these two women. And I'm not even going to reveal what happens with them, but it's like a modern day take on Frankenstein, very realistic. There's barely anything supernatural in it. Very disturbing sequences, but it's not necessarily in the stuff that you see. It's in the implication of what's happening to certain people.
So my number 5 is a movie that I've gotten to see twice in theaters, and a movie that I then introduced to Charlotte. And each time I've watched it, I've enjoyed it more and more and more. And it's The Sacrifice Game. Uh,
Okay.
this is directed by Jen Wexler, written by her and Sean Redlitz, and absolutely, I think this is such a fun movie. It's such it's a movie that is going to instantly go into my holiday horror. Uh, what do you call those old fashioned things that people had on their desks with the phone numbers in them?
A Rolodex?
Yeah, it's going to go in
Yeah,
my
yeah.
holiday horror Rolodex. Every year I pull out and I'm like, all right, let's see what I'm watching this year. And The Sacrifice Game is going to go there. Basically, you have a cult. We covered this on the channel. We did a full in-depth review. You guys should go check that out. I also recorded a Q&A with the director, the co-writer, producer, star at the Shutter Showcase at the IFC theater here in New York City, and that full Q&A is up on the channel as well. You should check that out. But yeah, you have a cult who are they are going around murdering people near Christmas, working their way towards an all-girls school so that they can basically summon a demon, thinking that they will get everything that they want from this demon for summoning, as a reward for summoning him. And things do not go their way. And that's all I'll say. I won't spoil it, but they get to this all-girls school. There's basically only 2 girls there, and their teacher left for the holiday. And so you have these 2 students, the teacher, and these 4 cult members. There's rituals, there's gore, there is some really clever humor, there's some really good twists. One of my favorite twists of the year, again, one of my favorite acting performances of the year. Probably, if I was going to give an award to best child performance of the year, it'd be Georgia Akin for her role in this film. And yeah, it's on Shutter. I can't recommend it enough. I might as well go first for number 4.
Go
I
ahead.
have a feeling it might be on your list. I'm not sure.
Okay.
It's Hell House LLC Origins, The Carmichael Manor. God, that is a mouthful.
It is actually not on my list.
Okay, well, we reviewed this movie together. You actually binged through the whole series of Hell House movies. This was, like I said, a Shutter showcase at IFC in Manhattan, and Stephen Cognetti, the director, was there. There's a full 25 to 30-minute Q&A with him up on our channel that I recorded.
Oh, nice.
And just awesome. Again, such a simple found footage is one of those subgenres that either people love it or they just never want to watch another one ever again. I think when found footage is done right, it is probably the most effective type of horror movie, because you, as the viewer, you are the camera. So every jump scare is legit. There's no musical crescendos and this and that. And I think that what Stephen Cognetti's done with this Hell House series is he has perfected this found footage element, and he's done such a great job. And what I loved about this movie is, and he admitted, he felt that they had done everything they could with the Abaddon house in the first 3 movies. So he wanted to kind of move the story, not in a completely different direction, but maybe parallel, so that we're looking at something just off to the side. And I think this story happens just before the original Abaddon house. uh, and again, it's such simple things. It's the camera lingering on the wall, and then a hand comes out from behind the wall. It's the camera looking at an open closet, and you as the audience member going, "Oh, come on, don't go in the fucking closet."
Right.
Uh, it's those damn clowns. It's
Yes.
the red ball, a la the Changeling. You know,
Right.
leading characters around the house. It's that amazing scene that we both loved, where the girl is on a she's on the laptop and she's looking at photos, and the photos are of her from behind her,
Oh, that is a great
and
sequence.
you're like, oh my god, like, ah.
Yeah.
It had one of the best theater reactions. Again, this was a packed crowd. The girl next to me was like leaping out of her seat into her boyfriend's lap during the movie.
Right.
uh just awesome. And they can literally, Stephen Cognetti and his crew, they can make another Hell House movie every year, and I'll be there to see it, because I think this is one of the most unheralded franchises in modern horror. And if you like found footage, this is a perfect place to start with this franchise.
I really enjoyed watching each movie in the series so far, so we could post it on this channel. And I think that this one was one of the better ones. It's like the first one, then this one. For me, uh, I enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty scary. I thought it might actually make my list too, but I just really enjoyed the characters in pretty much every other movie on my top 10 more than I did the characters in this movie. This had some great sequences, but I think the characters I enjoyed a lot more in my picks. And I think that maybe the characters I enjoyed the most, well, they're in my number one movie. But for my number four, I have The Blackening, which I think that the cast in this movie is just fantastic.
Oh yeah.
This movie is this great blend of horror and humor. It's never too silly or stupid, and there is a tension because you don't want the characters to die. I won't say that it's actually scary, but I don't think that you are ever like you're never really afraid watching this movie. There's a part in Us where I feel like the movie kind of goes over a curve, and like all the tension is kind of gone, and it's fun to watch, but it's not this like kind of tense, scary experience. I feel like this entire movie, I feel like The Blackening is set in that time where it's like it's fun, like you're rooting for the main characters always. You don't want the killer to take out the other cast members.
No.
It is like self-referential, like Scream. They reference other horror movies left and right. They reference all these amazing, like the black trivia that's in this movie is ridiculous, especially when there's actual trivia game. It's
Yeah.
such a funny sequence, but it's this great commentary on just how oblivious we are as white people, and like how present black culture is too. Like, we covered horror noir a couple of years ago, and I think that this would have its own segment on horror noir. This is like
Yeah,
where
that's a
things are
great.
going.
If if the makers of that documentary were to do a part two, this would have a very big section in it. Obviously, you'd have uh, Jordan Peele's films. You'd have Us and Nope.
Right.
I think Get Out was in there, but
Right.
yeah, I think this would definitely play a big role. This was on my honorable mentions. I really enjoyed this. This was a lot of fun, and I would not mind them making a couple more of these.
All right. All right. Let's just keep that momentum going. What you got for your number three?
Number three is the latest entry in my favorite horror movie franchise, and it's not even close. It's The Evil Dead, and it's Evil Dead Rise.
Of course.
Evil Dead Rise somehow lived up to the hype and the expectations I had for it. There were a lot of movies this year that I felt I had a lot of hype and a lot of expectations for, and they fell short. Renfield is an example. Oh my God, Nicolas Cage's Dracula. That's going to be so great. It wasn't. It was just not a great movie. Thanksgiving. I know some people loved it. For me, it just missed the mark. It wasn't what I wanted it to be after, waiting 15 plus years for Eli Roth's Thanksgiving. I thought it was okay. I thought it was
Right.
too 90s, whereas the original concept made it seem too 80s. It
Right.
made it seem 80s. Evil Dead Rise hit me in that sweet spot. This is my favorite franchise. To me, there have been 5 awesome movies that are all somehow unique and different. And there's been an amazing spin-off series that I love, Ash versus Evil Dead. Everything about this franchise is my favorite. And um, this movie, the performance of the year for me is Alyssa Sutherland as the mom who gets possessed. You have her up on the screen. She's above your head as I'm looking. I have the shirt. Mommy's with the maggots now. Maybe the coolest line in any Evil Dead movie. That line sold people tickets. I'm convinced that there are non-Evil Dead horror movie fans, that there are non-horror movie fans that saw the trailer.
Right.
And when she pops out of the bathtub and goes, "Mommy's with the maggots now," there were people that were like, "Oh shit, we're gonna go see this movie." I I love that they took a chance and they took the Evil Dead concept out of the cabin in the woods. They tease you at the beginning with the cabin, and then they take you back. They take you to this high-rise apartment building that's like derelict. It reminded me of a movie that I think we talked about last year in our list called
Absolutely.
Satan's
Satan's
Slaves
slaves.
2,
Yep. Yep.
where
Yep.
it was a derelict apartment building
Right.
that is like sinking into a storm as like demons are rising up and Satan is coming to get everybody.
Yeah.
And oh my God, some of the scenes in this movie. I mean, the cheese grater got all the fanfare,
Yeah.
but there's so much more than that in this movie. I mean, you got a scalp being ripped off. Uh, I mean, they get it. Obviously, it's Evil Dead. They get a chainsaw involved. I loved everything about this movie. I could nitpick it a little bit, and I think we probably did. I think we had like Mike Bongiorno on and Brian maybe, and I think we all kind of talked about it.
Yeah.
There are things that, maybe I could have put this here, but it was an Evil Dead movie that was a hard rated R, lived up to the hype, gory as hell, had memorable scenes. It had a lead protagonist that I really was into, played by Lily Sullivan, who
Yeah.
plays the sister. I mean, the balls of this movie to do what it does to children, I I fucking loved it. It's an Evil Dead movie that I loved, which makes it every Evil Dead movie. So that's my number 3.
Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed this movie. If I did have an honorable mention section, it would probably be on there. I talked about it a lot, in our review, and you guys should definitely go check it out if you haven't yet. Um, it's funny. For some reason, what bothered me about this movie was like how mean it was. Like, and really, oh, that sounds so fucking lame to say about an Evil Dead movie. I mean, all of them are fucking mean, right? But I think like the ultimate fate of some of the characters that bothered me. Now, in Evil Dead, in most of the movies, a lot of times you just have like Ash as the survivor, and so kind of like fuck everybody else, right? But in this movie, they make you get invested in all of the main characters in this family. And so what ultimately happens to some of them kind of bothered me. Now, I mean, that's good, right? That's maybe what horror should do is you should be bothered by what happens to innocent people in them. Um, that's kind of my segue into
Uh,
this next movie, right? Because Evil Dead, I think so here's the thing. I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with Evil Dead Rise. And I can't really nitpick it that much. I think that that's what ultimately turned me off is like what befalls some of the main characters. In this next movie, there's even more horrible stuff that happens to the main characters. And I don't know why. I think because in the next movie I'm about to say, which is When Evil Lurks, it's not that like you're bought into these characters before the horror. Like you kind of go through the horror with them. So it's kind of more acceptable what you experience, right? What would you agree?
I I'm still in PTSD from When Evil Lurks. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I and I'll talk about it a little bit later.
Yeah, okay, okay. Well, so then that's my number three. We'll get to your number three then. So you just did Evil Dead Rises, your number three.
Mhm.
What? So your number two is not When Evil Lurks?
No,
Okay, so then is your number two the Big G?
the big G.
Okay,
Yes.
okay. All right. So that is my number one. So let's talk. Let's take the time to talk about this one now.
Okay, so this was a big bone of contention. Not really. I don't want to say it like that because it wasn't like we didn't argue at all. I just
We argued for hours about this.
yes,
Yeah, yeah,
uh,
yeah,
vigorously. It was
yeah.
like two messages back and forth. Are we going to put Godzilla on the list? I am. Okay, fine.
Right,
That was
right,
the whole. That was the argument.
right,
Uh, Look, this movie is going to be on my best of the year list.
right.
I fucking love this movie,
Yeah.
and the I'm not going to say anything, and you're not going to say anything that pretty much everyone who's seen this movie has said, and that is, this is the best Godzilla movie ever made. This is the scariest Godzilla has ever been,
Yes.
and I think that is where putting this on a horror list makes sense for me.
Yeah.
In that, for most since 1954, the
Right.
original Godzilla,
Right.
he went on a 50, 60-year trajectory of becoming the big dinosaur hero,
Right.
always fighting like Power Rangers, fighting against like these alien monsters and these other giant kaiju monsters. And in this movie, he rises and he just fucks up everything. And he is scary as hell.
Yes.
And the characters have genuine fear. The main character in this movie
Yeah.
goes through like legitimate PTSD, and
Yeah.
and his grief and self-loathing
Yeah.
is based in a fear of Godzilla, and like just
Yeah.
and everything about Godzilla in this movie is terrifying. Like
Yes.
there's the scene of him that you see in the trailers now where he's swimming with his head up out of the water chasing the fishing boat, and you're like, whoa, like you've
Yes.
never seen anything like that in a Godzilla movie.
Yes.
And just everything, the radioactive blast scene in this movie, I mean, fuck you, Oppenheimer, that's the best radioactive blast of the year.
Let's get to your number one, which
What
does
was your
not.
number two?
My
Oh,
number two, we just like we kind of go right over my number two, which was Talk to Me. Which that's another movie that's kind of bleak too. Um, yeah, Talk to Me, you kind of said a lot about that. Let's just jump right into that number fucking one for you though. Because we did my number one, Godzilla minus one.
Yeah, I
No,
mean, there's nothing happy and fuck yeah about my number one. It's When Evil Lurks.
yes.
This was number one the minute I walked out of the movie theater. And it was
Yes.
really just a game at that point of, is anything going to top this? And the answer was no.
Right.
I very rarely have I seen a movie that affects me in the way that this movie did. This movie had at least 4 separate moments that made me curl up in my seat and vocally react. I mentioned his name earlier, Demian Rugna. He directed the scariest segment of Satanic Hispanics, and he directed this movie. His first film, or not his first film, the film that I know him from, Terrified, is a movie that was one of the first like big Shutter hits. And this movie, my God, whether it's the beginning of the movie where they find the infected man who's swollen and pus filled and gross, and it's just nauseating to look at. And then it becomes this incredibly bizarre type of possession movie. And then there's you mentioned it earlier with Evil Dead Rise being mean, especially to characters. This movie does things to children. I think when we talked about this movie, we referenced a movie that was very high on our list last year, Speak No Evil.
Yes.
And nobody likes to see bad things happen to children. We both have kids. Nobody likes to see bad shit happen to kids. But when stuff happens to kids, I think there's that visceral reaction of it just stays with you longer. And there's 2 scenes like that, right, where you think to yourself, nothing can top that first one with the dog, right, until later on when you come upon like a zombie woman eating the inside of her fucking kid's skull. And if it sounds like I'm ruining it, I'm not. It just this is a movie that is not meant to be enjoyed. This is a movie that is meant to be experienced.
Right.
And as a horror fan, all I could ever hope for is a movie that sticks with me, that makes me uncomfortable, that makes me think about it when I lay down to go to bed at night. And I've been thinking about this fucking movie since the day I saw it. And I want it to stop because I don't want to think about this movie anymore.
Yes. It's funny because you referenced Speak No Evil, right? And the thing about Speak No Evil is the end of Speak No Evil, I think, bothers me more. It makes me cringe more. It haunts me more than anything in this movie. But this movie has more upsetting, like it has multiple upsetting moments. They're not like as bad, but they're very close, and there's multiple. What's interesting about Speak No Evil and kind of our discussion that we've been having tonight is that you can really care about characters and be into them, but there's essentially what happens is there's like they're good innocent people and horrible things happen to them, and maybe you feel like that, well, that's not right that it happened to them. Then there's people that maybe they were innocent, but then they do something kind of corrupt or they do something stupid and something horrible happens to them, and you're like, okay, they kind of deserve that because of what they did. In Speak No Evil, the family, like, it's like, well, you really kind of do fucking deserve this based on what happened. In this movie, when evil lurks, there's always fucking evil. Evil's always fucking with children. They even say that in this movie, actually. They say something like evil is interested in children in particular. But in this movie, it's kind of 50-50. It kind of feels like, oh, well, this guy's innocent and he has this special needs son and he's just trying to, like, survive, and I feel bad for him. But then he also makes some foolish mistakes, and it sounds like he kind of was an asshole beforehand too.
Yeah. I mean, he was obviously a bad guy to begin with. He works for a local gangster. He's separated from his wife and and children, who there's like a hint that he may have abused. Just at the end of the day, and I always shout this from the hilltops, and I'm very proud to continually try to introduce Charlotte to more and more foreign films.
Yeah.
Because these are the types of things, these are the types of movies, Speak No Evil, When Evil Lurks, you can't get away with in the United States.
No.
And what's interesting and what's crazy to me is that they are remaking Speak No Evil. I think James McAvoy is attached to it.
Yeah.
And what I've found is foreign movies, foreign horror especially, can just get away with doing the stuff that we can't.
Yeah, yeah.
And the perfect examples of this, to go slightly off topic, to go back to that French extremist movement of the early 2000s,
Yeah.
and you think about movies like Inside,
Right.
and which is a Christmas movie, by the way, and Martyrs.
Yeah.
Those movies got American remakes, and they're terrible
Oh, I didn't even know
because,
Inside had one.
yeah, and they're terrible because the things that made them special is the grittiness of the filmmaking and the tabooness of the filmmaking, and it's kind of a watered down rated R when you bring it to the United States.
Yeah.
You know, because you want to make money, so it's got to pass, it's got to go through the censors, and it's got to be cut down so that it can get an R rating instead of an NC-17 or an X rating, where it's like, I don't know what it is, but in the early 2000s in France, they were like, what are the worst things we could ever do to human beings? Let's make movies about those. And
Right.
now
Right.
it's like, last year, Speak No Evil was, I think it was Danish and Dutch. This movie is Argentinian. A couple of my other, films that were on my honorable mentions list were foreign horror films: The Elderly, The Conference. I love foreign movies so much. I just introduced Charlotte to Rare Exports,
Yeah.
one of my favorite Christmas movies from Finland. And it's like, I love the fact that she's at that age where she can start to appreciate foreign films.
Yeah.
Makes me so happy.
Well, I mean,
And
like,
yeah,
Talk to Me. We could bring back my number 2 right here, and I could kind of mention it for a second. Talk to Me is a foreign horror film as well. We just
you're
don't really necessarily think of
100%.
it.
So is Godzilla.
Right. So is Godzilla. Right. Right. But but Talk to Me kind of fits in more with this because
Yeah.
it is like, and once again, it's like a character that does some things that you don't approve of, but they are innocent, and then awful things happen to them. And there's something that happens to a very young teenager in Talk to Me, but it's just despicable too. I mean, I just, one little shot. I'm still kind of haunted by this one shot that you see of this one teenage character in like this spirit realm in Talk to Me, where I'm like, what the fuck am I even looking at? That was one of the most disturbing things I saw this year. But it is that kind of thing, that thing with horror, and especially foreign horror, where they can do things to the young and the innocent, and it just gets to you. And you could do it to be sensational and gratuitous, and it just feels stupid. Or you can do it in quality movies like Talk to Me, When Evil Lurks, Speak No Evil, and it just haunts you
Yeah. I
afterwards.
mean, I'm, just as we're wrapping this up, I'm starting to think about movies. It occurs to me that my number one horror film of, I think it was 2021, if we were to go back, was
Yeah.
an Asian horror movie called The Medium.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes. Oof.
we mentioned Satan's Slaves, which
Yes.
is, I think that's, oh God, it's from a Spanish speaking country. But then there's, I know there was that other movie from Netflix that was Indonesian. There's a couple Shutter movies that were Indonesian horror films that we put on our lists
Oh
also.
yeah.
Like, if you, I feel like we're just preaching now, but like, uh if you're one of those people that says, I don't really like foreign movies, I don't really like reading subtitles, do yourself a favor, just try it with horror movies alone. Don't worry about the dramas, don't worry about the comedies.
Yeah.
Just watch foreign horror movies, and you will open your world and your mind to so much sick, depraved shit. And
Yeah.
it really makes it so much better. As a horror fan, it's funny you mentioned Talk to Me being Australian. Godzilla does things. Is it any wonder that Godzilla -1 blew us away? But the American-made Monarch show is and
Yep.
all of the American-made MonsterVerse movies are like,
Danny, we have been talking for an hour and 40 minutes. This is going to be an edited episode. It's going to come out in 2 installments, but it's been a real pleasure talking about the movies of 2023 with you. And I just got to say, I say this every year, but I'm just very grateful to be your friend. And I would not have watched the majority of these movies if I hadn't known you. So thank you. This is our third year in review, right? That we've done
2020, 21, 22, 23. It's
four. We've
four.
done four of these.
I think so.
We did one
And
with Chris.
the highlight we haven't mentioned in this video, an hour and 40 minutes in, the highlight of 2023. We met each other.
Oh, yes, yes. I fucking love that's my favorite thing. Don't tell anybody else. That's my favorite part of the whole year is when we met. But yeah,
Best
yeah,
night
no.
I ever had in an Applebee's in Staten Island.
Yes. I can say the exact same thing. And I've spent many a night at Applebee's in Staten Island. But anyway, speaking of Applebee's, I need to go have some dinner. It has been a real pleasure, though, man. I hope you guys are subscribed to the Lastercast because you can watch this for all of 2024. And we want to know what were your favorite films of the last year. So happy New Year, everybody. And me and Danny will see you guys next time.